This is the most interesting homicide of all time. Of all time! And it isn't the most interesting just because it's more than 5,000 years old, or because this body has become the most studied human body in human history. It's the most interesting because I think we can solve it. Here are the facts. In 1991, hikers discovered this body peeking above the ice. He had been so perfectly preserved, they thought he had died that last winter. That is until they saw this beautiful copper axe, a weapon rare even for its day. And later analysis revealed the man they would dub Otzi lived 5,300 years ago. That's 2,000 years before King Tut. Otzi was found here, this small gully high in the Otzi Alps. So archaeologists initially presumed that he died of exposure, or maybe of an accident. And they were shocked when they examined his body a little more closely. This x-ray of Otzi's chest revealed this stone arrowhead buried deep within his left shoulder blade. The arrowhead severed his subclavian artery, which is a wound that would have killed him within moments. From the angle and penetration of the wound, we can see his killer shot him from behind and to his left, from a distance of about 100 feet. An incredible shot with a handmade bow of wood and stone. Modern bow hunters prefer to be within 50 feet of their target. And yet our killer shot Otzi with an arrow that looked something like this from more than twice that. We do know, however, his killer had a significant advantage, in that he surprised Otzi, and not just because he shot him in the back. Food in Otzi's stomach revealed he had just eaten a large meal of goat's meat within minutes of his death. And ash on that food suggests he had started a fire to cook it. Given the location of his body and the food of his stomach, here at the top of the Simoleon Pass in this small protected gully, it seems the killer snuck up on him as Otzi ate lunch. But here's where it gets more interesting. Why is Otzi's valuable axe still found by his side? This is like finding a Rolex on a murder victim. It proves the motive wasn't robbery. And if he was killed by an enemy tribe, why wouldn't they have just taken it? The mystery deepens further because we know the killer saw this and had time to take it. We know that because even though the arrowhead that kills Otzi remains in his shoulder, the shaft of the arrowhead is gone. You might think, well, it's been 5,000 years. Of course the arrow shaft is gone. But there's reason to believe that's not the case. Otzi was found with 14 arrow shafts by him and his full quiver, but they all belong to him. The arrow shaft that killed him is gone, and the killer may have taken it for the same reason he left his axe. 5,000 years ago, arrow shafts were of course all handmade, meaning they each bore unique characteristics of the person who made them. This tells us the killer was concerned that if someone found Otzi's body and saw his arrow shaft, they would know it was him. But this is of course only true if the person who discovered Otzi knew both the killer and Otzi, meaning they both belonged to the same community. This would also explain why the killer left this axe. The axe was incredibly valuable, but it was also unique, and people in the community would have known it belonged to Otzi. So anyone with it in their possession would have had some explaining to do. The absence of the arrow shaft and the presence of the axe suggest after the killer shot Otzi, he approached his target, stood over him as he lay dead or dying, flipped him onto his stomach, ripped out the arrow shaft, all while staring at an axe that he did not take. And it would seem the reason he did both is that Otzi was shot by someone who belonged to the same community as him. Someone who could not be seen with his unique axe or arrowhead, or people would know what he did. In other words, Otzi was shot by someone he knew. But the evidence that Otzi was shot by someone he knew is even more powerful than that, because on his body hides evidence of a powerful motive. Otzi was found with this chert knife still in its sheath, but you can see that it has a chipped point and there's dried blood on the edge of the blade that doesn't belong to him. Otzi was also found with a deep knife wound on his right hand that was made 24 to 48 hours before his death. It's a clear defensive wound, made as if he was parrying a knife attack, but it's the only knife wound on his body. In other words, the evidence suggests that within 24 to 48 hours of his death, Otzi engaged in a bloody knife fight, and he won it. Finally, and perhaps most convincingly in our case against Otzi's killer, is the incredibly remote location of his body at the top of the Simoleon Pass in the Alps separating Italy and Austria. From pollen in Otzi's stomach, we know he departed from this village in the morning, climbed all the way up here to the top of the Simoleon Pass, and was shot that afternoon. That means his killer followed him all the way from the village to the top of the pass before he killed him. But why would he bother with that effort? Why wouldn't he just kill him as he slept, or find some time to kill him while nobody was watching? Why would he go to the tremendous effort of hiking all the way up to the top of this pass? The killer's great effort is a powerful piece of evidence against him. It suggests his motive was so obvious, if his community had discovered Otzi murdered, they would have known who the killer was. In other words, to get away with the crime, the killer not only had to conceal their own involvement, they had to conceal the fact that Otzi had been murdered at all. So the killer followed Otzi all the way to the top of the pass, snuck up on him as he ate lunch, then shot him in the back. That way, those in the community would just assume that Otzi had died on the dangerous mountain crossing. These actions suggest to me that there are two options for who this killer was. One is that the killer was the same person who Otzi fought a day or two before. Obviously, that person would have a powerful motive, but there are two strong pieces of evidence against this. The first is that Otzi did not seem to know he was in danger when he died, because even though he was on the move when he died, he stopped for lunch that took more than an hour, which does not seem like the actions of someone running from the life after they had just survived an attack. But two, the hike to the top of the Simoleon Pass is strenuous. It doesn't seem like someone could do it after just losing a knife fight. So that leaves us with option two, and what I think is more likely. I think Otzi either killed or severely wounded someone in that knife fight, and this killer was an ally of his. Perhaps a family member, maybe a brother. But either way, the killer's actions suggest a motive so obvious, I think if we were to travel back in time, by simply announcing Otzi's actual means of death, we would identify the killer. But if we want to get even closer, I think there's a few traits we can identify by using logic and basic statistics. For one, the killer is far more likely to have been male, simply because today, 90% of the murders are committed by men, but this is also likely to have been true throughout history, because even in our relatives, the chimpanzees, male chimpanzees kill far more frequently than females. Second, there were many shepherds in Otzi's community at the base of the Alps, and there's reason to suspect that Otzi's killer would have been amongst them. That's because in ancient times, shepherding communities exhibited far more violence than farming ones, simply because shepherds were far more likely for their flock to be stolen than farmers were for their plants to be ripped out of the ground. In order to protect against that, shepherds had to protect their wealth with violence. But we don't need statistics to tell us what I think is Otzi's killer's most significant trait. He was an absolutely phenomenal archer. And to see how good, let's put ourselves in his shoes for one moment. As the killer aimed at Otzi, even if it was at his back, they fired from a distance, and they must have known the consequences of missing. In the past 2 days alone, Otzi had not only fought and defeated someone in a knife fight, then hiked a tall mountain pass, they had done so at middle-aged. Archaeologists estimate Otzi was about 46 when he died. People who get in knife fights regularly do not often live to be 46 years old, and when they do, it tells us something of life-saving importance about them. It tells us they're not someone who you want to get into a fight with, which is obviously why our killer chose to kill from a distance. But it also means our killer bet their life on a 100-foot shot using a bow that looked something like this. And yet not only were they confident, under this life or death pressure, they fired with deadly accuracy. That to me suggests if we traveled back in time, even though we could identify our killer simply by announcing Otzi's actual means of death, there's a far more fun and yet still effective way of doing so. We arrange one giant archery tournament with a giant prize for the winner. And then we wait. And if in the end someone splits an arrow to win it, we arrest them on the spot.